Mr. Chairman, you've recently returned from a visit through the Western Hemisphere to Latin America. What did you find?
I find that no matter where I go in Latin America or the Caribbean, people feel that the United States has not been engaged during the past several years, and they really want to have a partnership with our country. And I think it's a great opportunity for the Obama administration to step in and forge these partnerships with the countries really in our own backyard. There are so many of them. It's really interesting. No matter, you talk with heads of state of the different countries, whether they're from the left or from the right, they're all saying the same thing, that the United States has been involved in other parts of the world and really has neglected our own hemisphere. So I think that really needs to change. If we neglect our own hemisphere, we really do it at our own peril, because if we create a vacuum or a void, others will move in.
Just like Chavez.
Exactly, like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, like the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, you name it, they're ready to move in. So I think we ignore our brothers and sisters in the Western Hemisphere at our own peril. It's not good policy. And I'm hoping, by the way, that in April of this year, there will be something called the Summit of the Americas. It's going to be held in Trinidad, and it's held once every 4 or 5 years. And I've been urging President Obama and Secretary Clinton to attend, because I think that would show that there is a new policy and that we are going to be engaged. And I believe that both of them will attend, and I know that President Obama will make a big hit. Any country that I go to in the Western Hemisphere as chairman, they want to know all about Obama. You know, he's as popular elsewhere as he is in the United States. And so I think we really have a great opportunity to forge a new relationship.
Why is it that over a period of time, really it's a question of benign neglect, if you want to call it that, we have taken these countries for granted? And it could have serious repercussions.
Well, we've taken them for granted, and then when we deal with them, as we have in the past, we're heavy-handed.
Yeah, so
right. So they resent the fact that either we ignore them or we're trying to tell them what to do. That can't happen anymore. We've got to form partnerships. I think the way to do it, of course, is we have many foreign aid programs that are very good, USAID, and we have other things, the Peace Corps, and various grants and exchanges. We should really keep that up. There are lots of joint things we can do, combating terrorism. They want to do stuff with us. And
how about Mexico?
Mexico, I was going to just say it.
Yes.
Because that's where I was, and I met with the President of Mexico, President Calderon, who is doing an excellent job. And we were a bipartisan delegation, and Democrats and Republicans all agreed he's doing an excellent job. We met with him for well over an hour, and of course there is a problem, because right now the drug cartels are flexing their muscles in Mexico. There are two major ones. There's talk about them getting together, and they're trying to show President Calderon, because he's going after them, they're trying to show him who's boss. And while the Mexican army has a little over 100,000 troops, it's estimated that the drug cartels together have about 100,000, so they could almost match them man for man, which is very, very dangerous. And we need to do everything we can to help President Calderon and show that that we're not going to allow Mexico to become any kind of a narco state. Now, we're doing that in Congress. We've pushed forth an initiative called Merida, and I was instrumental in getting that passed and in pushing for the funds, and that will help Mexico. It's money and training and all kinds of things and equipment to help Mexico in their fight against drugs and in fight against the cartels and fight for stability and against crime. But we really need much, much more. And the last thing I want to say is that I have sent a letter to President Obama, signed by 54 members of Congress, urging him to implement something that's already in the law, and that is to stem the tide of assault weapons that come from the United States and go into Mexico illegally. 90% of the crimes committed in Mexico by the drug cartels and others are done with American-made weapons. And so if the president puts into effect a law which enforces the curbing of these guns, then that will go a long way. It won't do everything, but it'll go a long way in stopping the flow.
How do you overcome the NRA's opposition to that?
Well, this isn't a Second Amendment issue. In fact, this was a program first put into effect in the late 60s. The first President Bush, under his administration, adhered to it and went after these drugs. President Clinton did, but the past 8 years under Bush II, it was not implemented. So we're simply asking President Obama to go back and do what the first President Bush did and what President Clinton did, and that is to really go after these guns and not allow them to be used and smuggled south of the border to be used for all these illicit crimes.
You're a pretty busy man. You go all over the world, actually, in the question of jurisdiction as to what you have been doing. And one area of your interest, I'm sure, is the Middle East. You're on the Middle East subcommittee. The situation there seems to be quite confusing now. What do you forecast for that area?
Well, you know that Senator Mitchell was appointed as a special envoy, and I think that was a great appointment because I think Senator Mitchell, like in Ireland, who was able to come roll up his sleeves and iron out an agreement, if anyone can do it, Senator Mitchell can. So I think that was a good appointment. But of course, in the Middle East, there are lots of problems. You have the Palestinians divided. Gaza is run by Mahmoud Abbas, the Fatah faction, and of course the West Bank is run by him, and Gaza is run by Hamas. And Hamas is a terrorist organization, and we rightfully won't deal with them until they do three things: renounce terror, recognize Israel's right to exist, and abide by all previous agreements signed by the Palestinian Authority. It's ridiculous to ask Israel to make concessions to a group whose purpose is to destroy Israel's very existence. So I happen to think that the Israeli incursion in Gaza was a justified incursion. It's terrible that some civilians were killed, and by the way, most of the people killed were not civilians. They were Hamas terrorists. But the civilians are killed because Hamas builds the bomb factories and does all its missiles, lobbing its missiles into Israel in heavily populated areas. So in essence, Hamas uses its own people as human shields. And Israel, like any nation, cannot tolerate missiles coming into its cities being fired from Gaza, which, by the way, is still happening. If we in the United States had to confront a terrorist group that was over the border, say in Canada or Mexico,
like we're doing in Pakistan,
right? Lobbying all these missiles, we wouldn't tolerate it. We'd go after them. That's precisely what Israel did. And I think it's ridiculous to hold Israel accountable more so than any other country in terms of protecting its own interests. And if again civilians were killed, I blame Hamas for building their bomb factories in heavily populated areas. I blame Hamas for lobbying the missiles into Israel that come from heavily populated areas.
Well, can the Palestinian Authority, however, control Hamas?
No, they can't, and that's the problem.
Point, yeah.
And if we're going to have a peace deal, who do you negotiate with? If you negotiate with the Palestinian Authority, Hamas in Gaza will say it doesn't count for them. So what do you do? I mean, it's a very complicated situation. I mean, I think that we need to build up the Palestinian Authority so that the Palestinians will see that if they go the route of Hamas and terrorism, they will never get their state. But if they follow a moderate path of Abbas, then they will get their state. Everybody knows what the end game is. The end game is two states, a Palestinian Arab state and an Israeli Jewish state, living side by side in peace and security. That's the end game. The question is where do the borders begin, and that can be that can be negotiated. But Hamas has to recognize Israel's right to exist. Otherwise, why would Israel deal with them? Why would we deal with them?
The original